I tried building a company for 2 years with no previous business knowledge at all. And we almost raised $100,000 from Y Combinator. Now, running a startup or being a co-founder wasn't something on my radar at all. It wasn't on my list of goals for the year. I wasn't thinking about it in the slightest. And it was so far off my radar, matter of fact, when I got the offer to join the team, I just saw it as a little side project that I could put on my resume so that I could get a nice internship in the next summer. But I can tell you without a doubt that joining that team was by far the top 2 best decisions I made in college, and it wasn't number 2. So I'm gonna tell you guys how I made that decision and I ended up in the position I was. How I went from a designer to a co-founder and entrepreneur. How I went from just doing this as a little side project for my resume to this becoming a full-blown corporation that I was working my ass off to see succeed. You're gonna hear all about my journey, the highs and the lows. You're gonna hear about the work. You're gonna hear about the lifestyle associated with it. And overall, you're gonna see how I grew as a person throughout these 2 years. So with that being said, it's gonna be a longer video. Grab your popcorn, get your drink, and let's get into this story, man. All right, so first I'm gonna tell you guys just about how I ended up on the team in the first place. So this was the summer of 2019. I had just taken my introductory design course and I discovered my love for design. So I was doing a lot of logo design, but I also picked up a hackathon and I published those things on Medium. If you guys don't know about Medium, it's a blogging website that a lot of designers use. And by a stroke of luck, but also through just networking with my organization at school, I got discovered. So I had a good friend who was in that organization and he was co-president at that time. The other co-president was creating a startup. He didn't really know that I was into design like that until my friend told him. So he checked out my work on Medium. He saw the design work that I was doing. And I guess he thought to himself that, hey, I need a designer on this team. I need somebody to help this vision come to life. So let me contact him and see if he's interested. It was probably August, I think. And he reached out to me and he was like, yo, bro, I got this idea that I'm working on. And he asked me if I wanted to join. Now, at first I was like, this is a good project that I could work on. This is gonna be something that would be super dope for my resume. Let me go ahead and, join the team and see if I can apply my product design skills that I've been picking up over the summer. So I joined the team officially, and I joined as a visual designer actually, but very quickly I started to transition to product design. And the reason for that was that they already had the general structure for what the app was gonna look like. But when I came in there to start doing visual design tweaks and make it look good, I started realizing that just the overall user experience didn't seem to be making that much sense to me. And it was hard for me to just start applying visual design to it, knowing that the overall experience could be better in the product. So I talked to the CEO and I tell him like, hey, I know you hired me as a visual designer, but I don't think the experience on this current structure of the app really makes that much sense for what you guys are trying to do. So would it be cool if, we backtracked a little bit just to see if we could get something a little bit more solid before we move on to the visual design? So, he says that would be a good idea. And he's just like, work with the designers. At the time, there were about 3 other designers on the team. So I had to go to them as this completely new person on the team and tell them, hey, this app doesn't really look as good as it could. It doesn't look like it would function as good as it could. Let's just redo all of this. And I felt like a dickhead saying all of that, but I felt like it really needed to be said because for me, if I'm gonna take on a design project, I wanna make sure that the finished project accurately reflects who I am as a designer. And I feel like if I just let that experience go by and I just did visual design and made it look pretty on top of that, when I was presenting it to interviewers in the future, they would be asking questions like, why did you design it this way? Why did you put this content on this page instead of this page? And I would be like, I don't know. Anyway, so the early work was more so just working with those existing 3 designers and recreating the whole information architecture of the app, sketching screens again, and really going through some user research to make sure that we're building the right product. There was a lot of arguments between all of the designers. There was arguments between me and the CEO too. Like, you know, as designers, I feel like we get very passionate about our solutions, and sometimes it can be hard to work with other designers who have different visions for that. And especially it's a lot harder when everyone's just inexperienced as designers. You know what I mean? Like, I was only doing design at that point for probably like 6 months, if that. And most of that time was just spent learning the process. I hadn't applied it too much, and I hadn't worked in a team in that way before. So it was definitely very hard for me, and that was a transition that I had to work on. I had to really figure out how to leave my ego at the door and understand that everybody's bringing their best intentions to this design, and they're trying to make it look as good as possible, and they're trying to make it function as good as possible. So honestly, that process was pretty smooth. It felt nice because I really felt like I was actually designing at this point, and I was doing everything that I would have expected a designer to be doing. So our school has a startup accelerator program, and our CEO wanted to apply to it. And just to make things easier, I'm just gonna tell you the CEO's name. So our CEO's name was Rami. Rami wanted to apply to the startup accelerator program, and it would be super useful for us because the program allows us to get class credits for just pursuing the idea. And that was super dope for me because I'm like, oh, I can design and actually work on cultivating my skill set without having to put in overtime. I don't have to take an extra class for it. I could just substitute one of my classes for it. That's perfect. Now this is where it gets a little bit complicated. We're trying to apply to the Startup Accelerator program, and their first question they asked was, how many people did we talk to? How do we know that this is actually an issue that we're trying to solve on campus? Before I joined the team, they hadn't talked to too many people about it. They knew they were experiencing the problem themselves, and they maybe chatted to 6 people about the issue. But overall, it wasn't that many people we spoke to. So we realized that we were gonna have to go back into the field and just do more research. So we essentially told them that we're willing to change our idea if our research shows us that there's actually something different that we really need to be solving. And this is where Rami tells us, guys, now that we're creating a completely new idea, this isn't the original idea that I was trying to create, I can't just call you guys product designers on the team anymore. You guys are gonna be co-founders because we're creating an entire new idea and we're all in this together. So I'm like, oh snap, okay. So my position just went from designer to co-founder. I'm not sure what that means, but I'm still gonna keep doing my design job. And hopefully I don't have to do anything too much more than that. That's what I was thinking in my head. And honestly, it's because I just wasn't ready to step up to that co-founder position. I didn't know at all what that would entail. I just wasn't prepared. So just to backtrack a little bit, the whole idea was that we wanted to make it easier for the Black and Latino community on campus to access their organizations and events. Beforehand, we just had a GroupMe that we were using to communicate. And if any of you guys have used GroupMe before, you know that it's pretty hard to publish events and things like that in the chat because it's easy for all of that information to get flooded out when people start talking in it. So Rami and his team wanted to make a solution that was going to centralize all of that information in a place where people could always see it. So we end up getting accepted into the Startup Accelerator program. It's called Cornell eLab, by the way. We're working on our project. We're doing a whole bunch of customer interviews. Collectively, between the 5 of us, we interview about 100 people at a whole bunch of different college campuses. So we put the work in. We interviewed a whole bunch of people on their experience. And we didn't just interview students, we also interviewed some faculty members too to see what their thoughts were on student life. At this point, the team started getting a little bit smaller because remember, we're in classes at this point, we're at college. So people have all these credits that they have to take, and some of them just don't have the time to be interviewing all of these people or putting in this amount of work into the project. I'm sure a lot of people didn't necessarily expect the workload to start to ramp up like this. But for me, I wasn't taking as many credits, so I had more time to put into the startup. So I was just like, fuck it, I'm gonna stay with it. Why not? We're gonna see where this goes. So it was approaching, I want to say November. Our Startup Accelerator program had a pitch competition coming up. It wasn't necessarily a competition, but it was a pitching event. So all of the startups that were enrolled in the program, we were all gonna go to the World Trade Center in New York City, and we were just gonna pitch our startups to some investors and some lawyers, just to get people invested in the problem that we're trying to solve. Now this is where it gets a little crazy for me. So Rami apparently had another event that he had to go to that was at the same time as our pitch event. So that meant that he wouldn't be the one pitching the startup. It would be one of us. And I was like, I'll do it. I just raised my hand like that. Like at first I was mad hesitant. I was like, maybe I should let somebody else step up. But something in me just said, just go for it. So I went for it. And we get to work immediately on building the pitch. I used to get very low energy, or I would just not command presence in the room when I was presenting. So we were working a lot on just getting my tonality and vocals right and making sure that I remembered the pitch in the first place. It was nerve-wracking, I'll be honest with you. I remember being up at 12 a.m., 1 a.m., just practicing the pitch over and over. It was me and Rami in the room and he was recording me. And there were so many times where I just stumbled over my words or my voice cracked or something. It was hectic. Anyway, the time ends up coming where we need to go to the World Trade Center, so I'm on the bus just rehearsing the pitch over and over in my head. I can tell other people on the bus are as nervous as I am. So we were all in this together. We're like, you know, best of luck to each of you. We go and get this bread. So we go in there, we're on the 47th floor, I think. And by the way, I'm scared of heights. So I was up there, I was already nervous because I had to do the pitch. But then I was just extra nervous because I kept remembering we were like 47 floors in the air. So that also added to my stress a little bit. I go up there and I kill it. Everyone's applauding. I'm getting handshakes from the teachers and faculty at the Startup Accelerator program. And it's probably one of the best feelings I felt in my life because it was like, I didn't think I could do it, but then I did it and it was great. So I really felt like that dude for a little while. So at this point, I'm feeling good. And I think this is the point where I really feel like a co-founder. I think getting over that hurdle of pitching the startup as if it was just as much my idea as it was everybody else's, that made me own the idea more. So around this time, a competitor comes along and the name of the company is called Squad and it's run by this girl named Issa Watson. And she has the most impressive resume I've seen. She graduated from MIT, Cornell. She was originally the VP of product strategy at JP Morgan. She was just overall a super impressive person. And she was making a company that essentially did the exact same thing that we're trying to do. And guess who one of their first customers was? Cornell, where we were trying to start off. So when we found this out, we were shook, we were heartbroken. I think we almost cried. Like, we were just like, yo, we put all this work into coming up with this idea and we're just about to start building it. And then someone just beats us to the punch. So at this point, we're thinking, okay, do we drop the startup? Do we just stop working on it? Do we have to change our idea completely? What do we do? Okay, so I'm editing this video right now and I realized that I didn't tell you guys what our idea changed to at this point. So we were essentially matching people up for one-to-one chats based on their similarities and interests. We realized that we wanted to focus on matching people for networking and conversations. So after, a week or so of the initial shock, once that started to wear off, we started realizing that just because somebody's first doesn't mean that they were best. Yahoo was around as a search engine before Google was, but Google beat them like crazy. So it's not about who did it first, it's about who does it better. So don't worry if there's already competitors in your space. In fact, I would say it's actually a negative sign if you don't see any competitors in your space, because that must mean there's something wrong with the space. Like, think about it. Do you really think that you were the first person ever to think about this idea? So if there's competition in the space, then that means you're on the right track. You're solving a problem that's actually relevant to people. At this point, we had already built a landing page. Rami was already starting to build the algorithm. One of the mistakes we made was building too soon. We were just too anxious to really start building this product. It can be very tempting when it looks like you have other competitors, it feels like you're late to the game, to just skip the validation of your idea and just start building it. Now that could be an issue because if people don't really like your idea, then you just wasted a whole bunch of time building it, designing it, coding it, and you got all of it to work just for nobody to use it. So what's worse, finding out nobody wants it through a little bit of manual labor in the beginning, or putting in a month or 3 months of effort to find out nobody wants it then? So at this point, we do our MVP test and it goes pretty well. People are meeting up that we matched up and we're like, okay, so this seems to be a good idea. Let's actually focus on building it. So at this point, we had to figure out a few things. We had to figure out, one, how we were gonna build it. That's the most obvious thing. But number two was how we were gonna monetize it. And honestly, we couldn't come up with anything that good. Right around this time when we were thinking about monetization, the COVID pandemic hit. And we were just about to start matching people up for in-person chats. So we had to think a lot more critically about how we could match people and still have them connect in a way that wasn't endangering their health. So we settled on a phone call or a video call. Now, this pandemic had an effect where a lot of businesses tanked because of it, but other businesses really thrived because of it. Like think Zoom, for example, their stock price went up crazy as soon as the pandemic hit because all of a sudden people needed to communicate virtually now. They couldn't communicate in person. We were one of those companies that ended up actually benefiting from the pandemic because it made us think about our problem in a different way. We were originally trying to match college students up and we didn't know how we were going to monetize that. But when we started to think about who our customers could be, we thought, oh, they could be the organizations that were impacted by the pandemic. Before the pandemic, they had a whole bunch of in-person events, but now their events have to be virtual. And now it's going to be harder for new members to feel like they're really a part of that organization and feel that family bond with them. So we could be that platform that helps create that intimate connection between new members of the community and the rest of the community, using these one-to-one matchings, these coffee chats, video calls, based on their interests and their hobbies and things like that. Now, it got even better for us when we started thinking like, okay, there's these groups that were on campus that were affected by this pandemic and now had to move online, and they would use our platform to help with that. But there's also communities that have been online completely from the jump. Think organizations that span multiple colleges. Think alumni networks. A lot of the time, the alumni aren't just still at the school. They're spread apart all over the country and sometimes all over the world. So they also need a way to stay connected. So at this point, I'm getting real hyped about this idea. And around this time, we officially incorporate as a C Corp. So if you don't know what that means, that just essentially means we're a company. We can sell our services for profit legally. At this point, we had to start thinking about so many things. We had to start thinking about a lawyer so that we could form these business contracts. We had to start thinking about how we were going to actually design and code this entire platform. We had to start thinking about who our first customers were going to be, how we were going to find them, how we were going to sell it to them. There are so many different things. So I want to say one thing that's super stressful about running a startup is the fact that there's not really much consistency in the startup life. You're always making sure that your idea is actually a good one. You're always making sure that the problem you're solving is actually the right problem to solve. You're always gonna have a whole bunch of things on your to-do list, and you have to sort through that to-do list to make sure that you're doing the most important things. You don't want to just be spending all your time doing work that doesn't really matter because you feel like you're working, but then you're not really getting anywhere. So prioritization is a very important part of the startup life. So around this point, it's approaching the summer, and I actually got an internship with Facebook at the time. And I'm thinking to myself, damn, I got this 9-to-5 job, but I also want to focus on my startup. How am I gonna balance that? So yeah, all throughout that summer, I was grinding for 12 hours a day. And a lot of the time I was grinding on the weekends too. So around this time, we started hiring interns. Since we were a C Corp, we could start offering them a stipend for their work. I think we offered them each like $500 or $1,000. I can't remember the exact amount. That was an interesting experience because I've never managed other workers before. So I'm really over here, an intern at Facebook, but then in my side hustle, I'm managing interns. And around this time, it's around July, August, Rami makes the decision to turn down his full-time offer from Microsoft to continue pursuing our startup full-time. At this point, I'm like, oh, this is real now. Like, we're really trying to build this thing. Around this time, the idea took a pretty big pivot again because we ran a pilot with this community called Color Stack, and we were matching their members up for one-to-one chats. And overall, it was a positive response from the community, but we realized that it wasn't that many members opting in. So we had to start thinking a little bit more critically about what value are we really bringing to the community. And that's when we had a chat with the community manager of that organization. And he says, hey, it's cool that you're able to match my members up like this, but I have more pressing needs as a community manager. So we're like, okay, what are they? He starts ratting off a list of things that he needs to get done that is difficult to do. He needs all these different tools to get it done. So we think, okay, bet we can make a tool that centralizes all of that functionality, and we can make that all-in-one solution essentially that you need for your community. So we're like, okay, this is completely different from what we were originally building. Now we need a decent amount of expertise in community building, and we need to scratch this platform and create an entire new one. At this point, I was like, bruh, like, we gotta design this whole thing again. You know how long that's gonna take? That's gonna take at least 6 months. And Rami's like, we're gonna do it. And I'm like, for real? He's like, yeah, we're gonna do it. And I'm like, all right, if you say so. So we get into it. This is the first semester of my senior year at college, and I'm spending barely any time doing my coursework and most of my time just working on Bloom. That's the name of our startup, by the way. I don't know why I haven't name dropped it yet, but Bloom was the name of our startup. Somebody said it sounds like a laundry detergent. That's wild as shit. You're wrong for that. You know who you are too. That's crazy. So essentially we put our heads down and we build this platform from scratch, and we build it all the way out to an MVP. It honestly wasn't an MVP because we had a whole bunch of features in there. It was more so of like a version 1. And we got to the point where, you know, it was super well designed. It tackled a lot of needs of community members and community managers. So we made a landing page of it. We got contacted by a whole bunch of organizations asking for a demo of it because they were super interested in the platform. We were like, dang, like, we're actually getting a very good response from this. We're scheduling demos back to back. We're showing them the platform, how it works. Super proud of all the work that we put into it. There was so much design and so much coding that had to be done, all while we're still juggling things like sales, VC pitches. There were just so many other issues we had to think about as we were building this entire thing, and we were able to make it happen. Anyway, we scheduled about 20 demos, and a lot of people are super interested in the platform. But the problem is that each of them want just one more feature on it, and then they'll get it. At this point, my co-founder was getting super burnt out, and I didn't realize this. He didn't really communicate that to me, but also I never really asked him. So one thing I want to say is that if you are building a startup with another person, you want to make sure that your communication is on point. Now, we were communicating every day, but we weren't communicating on that level where we're like, hey, where are you mentally? with this startup? Where are you mentally with this entire journey? Because it can be very taxing. There's a lot of times where you're working on it and you're getting no positive feedback, you're not making any money, and those lows can be very low. There's other times where you're working on it and everyone's telling you this is a great idea and people are trying to buy it, and you're like super hype about it. So the morale, it's just up and down, up and down. And it's hard to really get a strong work-life balance, especially in the early days, because if you're doing this for your livelihood, you need to put in as much effort as possible to get it to a point where it's actually paying you. And we still weren't getting paid for it yet. So anyway, that being said, just make sure you check on your co-founder, really see where their head's at with everything and see if you need to pick up any responsibility. We were doing sales and things like that, but I was very caught up with my classwork and I wasn't able to offer as big of a hand with the sales and things like that, while Rami had to take on a lot of that work and he was just getting super burnt out. Our ray of hope comes through. We applied to Y Combinator. If you guys don't know what that is, it's another startup accelerator program, except if you get into it, they give you $100,000 and you get access to this huge network of other tech startups and mentors. So we were laser focused on that. We were practicing our pitch over and over and over. We landed an interview after doing our application, and that was huge because only a small percentage of applicants actually get the interview, probably like 1%, 3% or less, and thousands of people apply. So we were super hyped to have gotten the interview in the first place. I just want to say that's a big success there. But when it came to doing the interview, we ended up not getting the funding. And the main reason was because they didn't see how this business could become a billion-dollar company. And Y Combinator only really invests in potential billion-dollar companies. Us, we could have seen ourselves at, multi-million, something like that, but definitely not a billion, because we would have to charge every community like $5,000 per year to really start bringing in that sort of money. So it just didn't make sense financially or logistically. After that hit, that was really Rami's last straw, and I don't blame him for it. He'd been working on it full time. He graduated a year before me. So it was a lot of work and effort you had to put into it. So since he decided, he needs to take a step back from it, I figured it would also be best for us to just give it up overall, because he was the engineer. And I want to tell you guys, if you find a co-founder who can really build out your vision, it'll be very hard to find another person with that same sort of passion, drive, vision, competency, and someone that you could really work with well together. You and your co-founder, that's like a marriage. You guys are together with each other all the time. You're gonna spend more time with your co-founder than you do with your girlfriend or your boyfriend. Make sure there's someone that you really trust. So what did I gain from this experience? Honestly, overall, I grew so much in my interpersonal skills, really. My confidence in myself went up like crazy. When you take an idea from zero and bring it to something and people actually fuck with the idea, that does a lot for you. There were a lot of situations where I was put in positions where I had to perform, and I performed, and it really showed me that, I have more in me than I really think I do. I learned how to communicate with people a lot better because we did so many pitches, we did sales, we had fellowships and accelerator programs. We had to share out our knowledge more. And, I at one point felt like a mentor in the space, but I was just peeping a whole lot of game and giving out a whole lot of game. And it made me feel like I belonged here. And even though I never really quite felt ready to be a co-founder or an entrepreneur, I'm so glad I did it, because I was able to prove to myself that even though I didn't feel ready, I can still do it. So no matter what, if you put your mind to something, focus on the success of it. Don't think about how it can go wrong. Don't think about how you're not ready, because 9 times out of 10, you'll never be fully ready for something. But if the opportunity comes, you can't pass that up. All right, so that was the video. That was the story of my startup journey, my 2-year startup journey, the highs, the lows, why we failed, why we stopped, and what I learned from it. So I hope you guys took away a decent amount from this. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, leave a comment, give me any feedback that you found interesting. I played with a new lighting setup right here, and I also got a mic, so hopefully the audio quality is better on this one. But anyway, that's it for this video. I'm out.